All right, let's get right into it. We're going to tackle one of the most fundamental questions in all of biology. How do organisms actually reproduce?
But before we even get to the how, let's ask a much simpler question. Why? Why even bother? I mean, think about it. Unlike breathing or eating, reproduction isn't something an individual organism needs to do to stay alive, so why put all that effort in?
Well, the answer is actually pretty simple, but it's also really profound. It has nothing to do with the individual's survival. It's all about the survival of the species. Without reproduction, a species just blinks out of existence. It's the one process that guarantees life keeps rolling on, from one generation to the next.
At the very heart of this whole process is the act of copying a blueprint for life itself.
And that blueprint is DNA. You can think of it like the ultimate instruction manual, packed away inside the nucleus of a cell. It has all the info needed to build an organism, every little detail. So at its core, reproduction is really just about making a copy of this DNA.
Okay, so you're making copies. But here's the thing you gotta ask. When you photocopy something over and over and over again, do the copies stay perfect?
And the short answer is nope, not at all. And it's the same deal with DNA. No biochemical process is ever 100% perfect. So tiny little errors, or variations, are gonna creep into the copies. They're super similar, for sure, but they're not absolutely identical.
And this is where it gets super interesting. These tiny little changes are a double-edged sword. For one single organism, a variation might not be a good thing. It could even be harmful. But for the species as a whole, that variation is the secret sauce for long-term survival. Just imagine the environment suddenly changes, it gets way hotter. Most of the population might not make it, but a few individuals with a random little variation that helps them handle the heat, they survive, they reproduce, and boom, the species lives on.
Okay, so with that idea of copying and variation in our back pocket, let's check out the first major strategy for reproduction, going it alone. These are asexual methods, where you only need one parent. First up, you've got fission. This is the go-to method for a lot of single-cell critters, like the amoeba here. It's about as simple as it gets. The parent cell gets bigger, copies its DNA, and then just splits right down the middle. One parent becomes two identical daughters. It's ridiculously fast and efficient.
Next is a method called budding, which we see in organisms like the hydra. Instead of an even split, a little outgrowth, a bud, starts forming on the parent's body. It's basically a mini-me that grows and develops right there, and then eventually just pops off to start its own life. It's kind of like a new little twig sprouting off a branch.
And then we have what is, honestly, one of the most mind-blowing tricks in all of nature, regeneration. Take this flatworm, a planaria. If you break it into pieces, each one of those pieces can regrow all the missing parts and become a whole new worm. I mean, that is a serious reproductive superpower.
And finally, there's spore formation. If you've ever forgotten about a loaf of bread for too long and saw that fuzzy stuff growing on it, you've seen this in action. That mold, which is a fungus, releases thousands of these tiny, tough little spores. Each one is like a seed in a suit of armor, just floating around waiting to land on a nice damp spot so it can start growing into a whole new organism.
So you look at all these methods, right? They're fast, they're efficient. It really makes you wonder, if just copying yourself is so easy, why in the world did so many organisms develop a much more complicated way of doing things that requires a partner?
And that question leads us straight to our second big strategy, the power of two, also known as sexual reproduction.
The answer comes right back to that idea of variation, but now it's on overdrive. Asexual reproduction has to wait around for slow, random mistakes in copying. But sexual reproduction, it's like taking two different decks of cards and shuffling them together. Every single time, you get a brand new hand. By combining DNA from two different parents, you create totally new combinations of traits in every offspring. It's an explosion of diversity that gives a species a much, much better shot at adapting to whatever the future throws at it.
But wait a second, this creates a huge math problem, right? If mom gives all her DNA and dad gives all his DNA, the kid would have double the chromosomes it needs. That would be a total disaster. So nature came up with this really elegant solution called meiosis. It's a special kind of cell division that creates sex cells, or gametes, that only have half the normal amount of genetic info. That way, when two of them combine during fertilization, the new baby is back to having the perfect complete set. It's just beautiful biological math.
Okay, so let's put this theory into practice.
Let's see how this all works in the real world. And we can start with something you can find right in your backyard, a flowering plant.
So for a plant, the flower is basically the main event for sexual reproduction. It's this incredible piece of engineering. You've got the stamen, that's the male part that makes all the tiny grains of pollen, and then, right in the middle, you have the pistil, the female part, which is protecting the ovules that will hopefully become seeds.
This whole process really boils down at two critical steps. First, you need pollination. The pollen has to get from the stamen over to the stigma, usually with the help of some wind or a buzzing bee. And then comes fertilization. That's when the male genetic material from the pollen grain travels down and fuses with the female egg cell inside the ovule. And that's what creates a seed.
All right, now let's switch gears and look at our second case study, one we're all pretty familiar with, human reproduction.
So in humans, we have these highly specialized systems. The male reproductive system is built to produce and deliver sperm, which are the male gametes. And the female system is built to produce eggs, the female gametes. And it's also uniquely designed to house and nurture a developing embryo.
And the journey from there is just incredible. It all starts with fertilization, when one sperm meets the egg. That fertilized egg, now an embryo, travels down to the uterus and implants itself in the wall. Over the next 9 months or so, it develops, getting all its nutrients from the mother through an amazing organ called the placenta, right up until it's ready for birth.
Now, because this whole process is such a huge part of human life, we've also come up with some pretty clever ways to manage it through contraception. And these methods work in a few different ways. You've got mechanical barriers, like condoms, that just physically stop the sperm from getting to the egg. There are hormonal methods, like birth control pills, which change the body's chemistry so an egg isn't released. And then you have surgical methods, which are a more permanent way to stop fertilization from happening.
So that brings us to the big final question. You have the speed and the sheer efficiency of asexual reproduction on one side, and the creative, variation-making power of sexual reproduction on the other. So which one is better? Well, the truth is, neither is. They're just two completely different but equally brilliant strategies for reaching the exact same goal, making sure life goes on. It really makes you think, though, which strategy gives a species the best odds in the long, long run?